You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Sean Wilkie, and along with my awesome co hosts, we interview the innovators in this space every week. Ivan, please go ahead and kick us off.
Hey, I'm Zach. Really excited about our guest today. His name is Chris Kelly. Chris serves as a managing partner and publisher for Antelligence LLC, a new insight and educational services company that publishes the Fountain Report, the Veterinary Student Insider, Pet Care Weekly, the Enterprise Practice Directory, and sponsors the Bird Bath podcast. Intelligence provides general industry training on the U.S. animal health market, as well as a deep dive into the P&L of the veterinary practice. Known for an agnostic approach to the animal health market, they have followed over 64,000 engaged animal health professionals. Before founding Intelligence, Chris built Vet Advantage magazine, which was acquired by NAVC in 2017. He also co-founded MDSI, a healthcare publishing firm based in Atlanta, and spent 25 years in the healthcare industry. Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you for finding the time.
Well, thank you too, Sean and Ivan, for having me. It's great to be here. Excited to talk to both of you and share with your audience as well.
So give us just 2 words on what are you mostly, there's so much in your bio, but the main focus, what are those things that Intelligence do? And basically, how did you start this? Where was the original idea? And now what things do you do?
So it's really our focus is news and kind of the business or financial information that allows people to kind of have that 360-degree view of what goes on in the animal health industry. So when I started in publishing, unfortunately, it was a long time ago. Everything was print. Print drove us. I read magazines, which I really don't read like I used to. That was the medium that was accepted. That was the way that, within certain verticals, communication was done. And obviously a lot has changed. And before we sold, that Vet Advantage suite of products to the NAVC, we had a pretty significant digital footprint, doing new things like building apps and an interactive website and all those things that were kind of maybe a little bit cutting edge at that time, very standard today. But we've really had to go through a complete overhaul of the way we think about communicating with our readers. And it's not print. So it's digital, it's websites, it's mobile to make sure that they can access us and our information anytime from any place. And while I used to think, when I was a print guy, that'd be great. We can get rid of all this cost in printing magazines and, layout, design. It's really not true. The investments you make into digital are more than we probably did in print, but it's what our customers want. So it's what we do.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, talk about innovation, right? The print world, media publishing world has changed so much. And you say unfortunately you've been in it for a long time, but I think it's also a pretty advantageous spot to sit in, having seen all of the changes. And maybe let's start there. Like, so out of all of these changes, what's the one change that's literally knocked your socks off in the last 10 years or 20 if you want to go back that far? Up to you.
Well, I'd say that it really just is this, complete move into kind of the digital age. And, if you had told me I'd be doing a podcast with you guys, even 5 or 6 years ago, I probably said, what? What's a podcast? So I think at the end of the day, we have this really fun and interesting position in the industry, right? So in publishing these various products, the amount of information that flows through our business every day, every week, every month is time consuming and overwhelming at times, but it's a really cool perch because you get to see everything that's going on. And I'm not a veterinarian, I'm a business guy. So being able to sort through that and figure out what's best for our readers is kind of a labor of love. It's something I love doing. It's something our team loves doing. And we gauge everything by engagement. So it's not, hey, we love this and we put it out. It's how many people clicked on it, opened it, interacted with us. And those are the metrics that we track. So our open rates in most publications are well over 60%, for certain audiences over 80%. So we feel like we've made the transition pretty well. We're not done by any means. I don't know what comes next, although we've bounced around some ideas. mean, the fact that we got into doing a podcast, I thought was perfect because while I'm not as much a podcast guy, a lot of our readers are. That's the way they like to consume information. And if that's what we want, it's imperative that we give it to them in the format they want.
You're covering so many aspects of veterinary business through various sort of channels. What are the trends that you're seeing? I know that we're talking about a little bit of a softening of the our unbeatable business that lives through recessions and COVIDs and everything else. Are we still that certain that veterinary medicine is the best bet as the business people, and are the outside investors still looking at our industry and drooling like they used to?
The drool might not be as heavy, but it will be again. So I'm an optimist by nature. And, I spent 25 years in healthcare, and finding animal health was probably the best thing professionally that's ever happened to me. I love it. It's a wonderful business for all the right reasons. If you take a look at like the APPA expenditure numbers from last year, it was 147 billion. That's a big number. It was a good growth number over previous year, but now we're starting to see some softening. So even they have predicted a fairly flat year. So those boom years, 20 and 21, driven by COVID and the pandemic, we're kind of reverting back to the mean. And for a lot of us, it's hard to do that. We're so used to, I would say, easy growth. Things were easy. You could build your business, you could grow at extraordinary margins. That's gotten a little bit tougher. And I think a lot of that probably comes back to the pet owning consumer. And to me, that's the part we probably don't pay enough attention to, as an industry. I mean, if you take a look now, it would be millennials and Gen Z. They're the major pet owning demographic. So almost 50% of the animals they own. And they are faced with the things everybody is faced with, but probably more acutely. So if you think about inflation and you think about, the Fed says we've had a soft landing. So you kind of believe them, but we still don't. We're not quite sure we're going to see a recession or not. If you look at the cost of owning a pet, it's up significantly over the last 5 years. And I think Dave Bolin from the Bolin Group at his presentation at Global Pet said it's up 25% over the last 5 years. Those are big numbers. So if you look at the primary pet owning consumer and the fact that they're probably going through all these things with inflation and the cost of car insurance, home insurance, going out to dinner, buying their pet products, student debt, and there's a lot of conversations around that. But at the end of the day, a lot of them are back into paying that debt. So their discretionary income has dropped greatly. And unlike Generation X and the boomers, those two demographic, the millennials and Gen Z, they don't always look first to the veterinarian. They'll look to other channels that they're comfortable with. And I think we need to make sure that the vet is always in that conversation and always the primary go-to in that conversation. So, as costs go up and all these things that, the younger demographic wants in terms of convenience and, cost effectiveness, we've got to make sure that we give them.
Yes, fascinating. So this perch that you sit up on, where you consume all of this information and data, you say you're an optimist. You say the drools subsided a little bit, but hopefully it will come back. What's the next 12, 24 months look like for the animal health if you had your crystal ball out and you were to make some bets? What's the future look like?
So I think you guys probably follow the same things I do in terms of business news, where we're going, what the economy is doing, worldwide and here. So I think that we're probably going to have a fairly flat year in probably, across the industry. I still feel like, if the consumer is the driver of the US economy, right now they remain cautious. And I think where they're cautious means we're not going to go fast. So I don't think it's going to be a terrible year by any means. But I think, like everything, it cycles, and that cycle is going to turn positive again. My hope would be that we start to see some green shoots there of really positive growth, Q4 of 2024, Q1 and Q2 of next year. And we've got, I think, a pretty powerful pipeline of some new products that some very large companies will be bringing to market. And that's always good. I think that creates excitement. It creates new buzz. It creates new revenue streams. So I am optimistic that, we'll come through this and that next year will be a better year than this year. I don't think this year's going to be terrible. I think it's just going to be a relatively flat or slow growth year, which is a little bit different than what we've all been used to.
It's interesting, the we all see just slight drop in overall revenue, and that's mostly due to not such a significant growth in new patients. And I don't know if that's the still post-COVID kind of flattening. But then you look at a couple big companies. The whole industry was so afraid of Chewy, and you're looking at Chewy stock in the last sort of 12 to 24 months, and you're down to like from 100 plus down to what 10 or something right now. Can you comment on that? Because we were so afraid of Chewy, and now all of a sudden, you're seeing that. Like, is that because that result is so significant on their company, but the industry didn't drop as much as they drop? What do you think is attributed to?
Chewy's a really interesting company and one that everybody does look to, and probably in their initial phase as they kind of bought customers, migrated them to auto ship and built their business. Yeah, they took a pretty big hit, but there was some really positive news out of Chewy last week. So their stock has kind of been in that 16 to 17 range, down significantly from 12 months ago, but it's popped up 15-20% over the past couple of days. So I think investors are starting to look at Chewy a little bit differently. The numbers were better, profitability was better. I think there's some excitement baked into the fact that they're opening veterinary practices. I got a secondhand account of what one of those practices looked like, and it was very complimentary. Well done, really consumer focused and customer focused, which you would expect. But I'd argue there's a lot of companies doing just that right now. If you take a look at a lot of these de novos, they're fantastic models. Pet Folk, City Vet, Bond Vet. I don't want to leave anybody out. There are 3 or 4 others that are doing the same things, but they're creating that customer experience that's going to bring in the millennial and Gen Z customer, probably appeal to baby boomers and Gen X as well. So if anything, my hope is that Chewy forces all of us to get better. And where they're really good is with customer experience. If we could bring their customer experience expertise into every independent veterinary practice, every enterprise practice, we'd all be better off, because I think that's what they do really well.
Yeah, it's amazing. And yeah, it's interesting. Their stock has definitely rebounded, kind of coming up. I think they're $21 closed yesterday or something. So very, very interesting. Chris, back a little bit more into the crystal ball world. I love having a conversation with somebody that's got so many data points. But what other interesting things have you seen in vet med in the last year? I mean, obviously, interest rates, the tightening of the economy, all of these things are playing into that. But when you get really granular, like, is there other kind of surprises in the data that you and your team have found?
You know, not any big surprises. So we just put together this enterprise practice directory. So it tracks 90 different corporate players, from the de novos to the consolidators to telehealth companies, 16 data points on each. And really just for us, we want it to be a roadmap for Fountain subscribers. So when people look at that part of the business, the growth, the business they control, they know they need to understand not just who they are and where they are, but how to do business with them. Obviously, that particular group has had certainly a challenging last 12 to 24 months. Interest rates, the cost of money going up changed their game. The multiples have come down significantly. The number of deals are probably a third of what they were 2 years ago. This year will probably come in flat again. And there are companies that publish a lot of good data on those activities. I'm thinking Scott Brown from Cherry Tree and the Ackerman Group. They really track that well. So, I think the pressure there for that group of customers is, all right, it was an easier game. We could go out, pay big multiples, get great practices, and then just get them integrated and keep going. Now I've got to learn how to run this business. I've got to grow my top line. I've got to grow my bottom line. I've got to do what's right for my employees so they stay with me. Where I get worried is, certainly, and this happens in healthcare. It was prevalent, and I can lean on that, that information. You can't just create fees and raise prices without pushing people into other places. So I'm hopeful that a lot of these large practices will be careful and will do the right things to bring, customers back in, not keep them out. One of our issues, and it gets talked about a lot as an industry, is really only the affluent customers today can afford to go to a lot of these practices. So if they can't find, a wellness, place to, clinic with posted pricing where they know they can afford something. And I will say that, all practices are doing a better job, the spectrum of care and offering options, and that's all positive, but it's not a healthy market if we have a lot of pets that aren't getting care. So how we solve all that, I think the market will do it. I'm just not sure exactly what it looks like as we move out into the future, but I think it'll happen.
Interesting question that I have. You mentioned, that all of a sudden right now the big corporates need to understand how to operate the practices. What do you think is going to be effect? And I'm not going to be even asking the question because I know the answer to whether these big companies that bought, hundreds and hundreds of hospitals know how to operate them. I know the answer. They know how to put them together and buy them. I don't think they know how to operate them, not in a way like, as they do now, but actually get granular to the floor level and optimize the practice, not just tweak the cogs and and then win the buying power and stuff, but truly operate the hospital. So I know that they don't know how to do that. But what is the effect of that? Because we have arguably 25+% of the industry now in these structures that were built to buy. They were not built to operate. What is that going to do to the industry? What do you think?
I'd probably lean back to my optimistic nature and say they've got a lot of smart people in those businesses. They know how to operate businesses. Most of the time, standard business principles do apply to animal health. So yeah, you've got to tweak the cogs and do all those types of things. I think the learning curve probably has to come back and be around culture. How do you make this a great place for people to work? And there are stories where the right things are happening in that regard. And I think as a society, we always tend to put the accent on the negative, right? This hospital did this, the costs were this, it was outrageous. In a lot of cases, I think they're doing the right things for the pets and for the pet parents, but not always. So I think that's probably culture and a better understanding of that pet owner experience and what good care looks like for their pets is where the most work needs to be done.
I'll jump on the bandwagon of optimism as well. These are businesses that have hundreds of millions or billions of dollars invested in them. They have to figure it out. Like the investment that's behind these organizations is massive. And if they run out of private equity here, so they'll be bought up by another larger private equity firm. And I think they will figure it out. And I do think that you're right, Chris. I think there's a lot of things that didn't have to happen that now have to happen. And I think that can only be a good thing for the industry. But I didn't want to have the last word, but I guess I did because we ran out of time. And we've got a couple of questions for you before we let you go. One is a YouTube video, a TED Talk, a book, something that you found inspiring throughout your career so far that you'd like to share with our audience.
I was thinking about that last night, doing a little bit of prep work, and it really probably was, I just go recent. We're besieged with a lot of negative mainstream media news, right? So I will read the Wall Street Journal, and that's about it. And I think it's a well balanced, good paper, good service. And I have really stayed away from the political news, any of that, and I'm a much healthier person for it. And even as you read through something like the Wall Street Journal, there's been this underlying tone of the protests on college campuses and what's wrong with our youth. And I went to a wedding. I think the bride and groom were in their early 30s. I could not have met a better group of people, passionate about doing the right thing, working hard, taking care of each other and taking care of the people around them. And that whole vibe permeated the entire thing. And we drove home and I told my wife, I said, that was amazing. Why I would ever lose faith in our youth, I don't know. I've got to stop reading it all. I don't want my Fountain Report readers to do that. But I just think we need to understand that we're in a great place. We've got a great country. We've got great neighboring countries right next to us. And at the end of the day, we're going to be just fine. There are a lot of good people coming behind us doing the right things.
Amen. Well, the second question that we ask, is there guests that you think would be good for this podcast?
Yes, there's a lot. So I am very close to a woman named Candace Goodwin, who's given me a lot of help with changing the direction and doing some of the things that we're doing with our business. She has a background that's very interesting. given, I mean, she's been big pharma, then Pet IQ, ended up running the Petco pharmacy. So her knowledge around the consumer is incredible. And that's kind of her shtick when she goes and presents, which she does a lot of. But I think she'd be a great person for you guys to consider bringing onto your show. I think the world of her, and I think your listeners would as well.
Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinaryinnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.